Welcome back, everybody, to the Victory Road World Cup of Pokemon VGC, sponsored by Elgato, GT Tour, and Metafi. I'm joined once again by Mave O'Rourke. We are here to present the remaining battles of this week, and we have quite a few fun battles between big teams coming up on your screen soon enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the one that we have upcoming, the only major deciding factors, right? It was decided yesterday during our stream between China and France. China now is no longer able to move on in the competition. However, France is currently playing for differential, and their opponents in Australia, who are currently playing Puerto Rico, they are playing for seeding. So on the opposite side, we did get to see a bit of Australia and Puerto Rico yesterday in the match with Sam Pandelis, which was very interesting to watch, of course, at that point. Now, however, if Australia ties with Puerto Rico, they will be in the, I believe, in the second seed. Or no, if they tie or they win, they have the opportunity to move forward in the first seed. However, if they lose to Puerto Rico, they will be in the second seed. So at this point, right, it's all about that seeding to move forward into that top 16 bracket, but it's also a great opportunity for us to showcase another player from France who we will be able to see in the next few weeks after the World Championships in London as we move towards that playoff bracket. So France, who had an incredible run last year, beating out Japan in what was a really, really high stakes week in 2021, now have the opportunity to once again prove themselves in this season of the World Cup and show everybody that they can go a little bit farther, maybe even bring it all the way to the end if they are able to do so, and I am sure they are fighting for it.
Yeah, they'll be fighting for it completely. Of course, a lot of these teams, they were ones that did make it into the next couple brackets. We'll be seeing after Worlds in the last season. A lot of them either coming back, maybe go a bit further than they did last time, go for those cherished prize money, or maybe even that cherished bit of, bit of push into the group stage next year. Even if not, they're playing for a bit of fun. They're playing just to get there as quick as possible, as easy as possible. Just have that practice for the World Cup, World Championship, sorry, that, we've been seeing a lot throughout this tournament these past couple of days.
Yeah, and I mean, practice is almost like the name of the game at this point, right? We get the opportunity to see how well these incredible players are doing, but the nice thing is it almost gives us a bit of a preview and look at these teams between China and France. A lot of very standard stuff, seeing a lot of Groudon, a lot of Kyogre, even seeing that Calyrex Ice and Reshiram combo from Ryan Guezi at the bottom there, looking like he got the win over China. So a couple of interesting teams. I'm only seeing one or two Shedinja on a team that typically has, I think, a couple more Shedinja teams, but seeing Hippolyte play it is not a surprise to me. So I'm excited for France to see kind of what they're bringing for this last match of the week, and then they'll kind of be able to wrap up for this week, move on to prep for the top 16, but most importantly now they may be getting a feel for a team they might like to use for World Championships if they're playing, for the Open if they're prepping a day 2 team versus a day 1 team, because the opportunity is there as well for the World Championships next week, and it is just a quick hop and a skip away from France. So, I'm really excited to see how Nicolas Carvalho and Jinghui end up playing today, because I think it's going to be really interesting when you're playing teams from a region that does not really compete in the same circuit as you. There are oftentimes very different teams that are built, a little bit of a different meta that kind of swings in a different way from yours. That's why typically even with the Japanese teams that we see when they pop up and they make their way over to us in the TPCI circuit, I think it's really interesting to kind of have that little bit of outside info, and China circuit as well can be really interesting. So having those different teams and that different experience when you're playing against an international group, I think is really valuable moving forward.
Yeah, it is really valuable, and as you said, going to World Championships, it is going to be even more points. Of course, China, facing France, now know they're going to face a French player. They're likely going to face Shedinja. If not, France completely throw it out of the window and just change it at the World Championships, which we might be seeing our players do here. We only saw 2 Shedinja from France's side, and that was something amazing, but seeing what France can do as well, we see that Nicolas Carvalho has a couple more, official events to his name there, with the Victory Road Spring Challenge top 8 in 2020, and then a little special event getting out top 4. So back in 2018 the format was a bit different back then, none of that pesky Dynamax that is the Marmite of Pokemon right now. But then we see Jinghui with the 6-time Shanghai monthly champion, which I do believe is like the Jolly Breloom sort of circuit they try and host about a month or so, just to try and keep the the enthusiasm up for Pokemon in China. So not the end of the world for both these players to be facing each other, but Jinghui has to really think, this player has competed in these top events in the official format, so they could be a bit of a threatening aura to them.
Yeah, and I mean, for both of these teams, right? Both of them did incredibly well last year. And so having the opportunity to continue and show your merit as a team moving forward is, of course, really, really nice. And it does provide you with a lot of experience. They've, Nicolas has used a couple of really interesting teams, Ice Rider, Calyrex with Reshiram and, French Rain, which was one of his wins. But now he's even switching it up even more with the Groudon Lunala. Actually, there we go. I was going to say this looks familiar to me. However, it is the Groudon and Calyrex Ice with the Incineroar, the Thundurus, Porygon 2, and Venusaur. And then on Jinghui's side, it is the Zacian, Groudon, Incineroar, Charizard, Gastrodon, and Grimmsnarl. Happy to see that it is the right color Gastrodon. Our great and amazing coworker Cesar behind the screen is a pink Gastrodon fan, so I had a little talk with him earlier today about that.
Yeah, our star favorite Road, they have their split differences. Of course, I like to make sure that my Gastrodon fits the color theme of my team, so I try and make it pink for things like Rainier Sun, because it is sunny, it's nice and pink there. And then often you don't see it with Kyogre, so there's no reason really to have blue. And then, just bring a team that is quite known throughout the Chinese players with that Rainier Sun. Of course, we had Chongjun, who took it to 40 something in 0, across many different events online IRL. But Nicolas Carvalho has a team that is very reminiscent of teams done very well, quite in tournaments. Probably hasn't gotten the best of top cuts, but it's still a team that's really strong. It's got its Trick Room mode, it's got its Speedy mode, it's got Thundurus to be annoying to opposing Incineroars. So it has all the tools that can really annoy Rainier Sun, but Rainier Sun is just Rainier Sun. And, hopefully the teamwork over in China means that there could be another victory with this team.
Yeah, and it's definitely a team that was, of course, everybody knew this team. It was so incredibly popular. I ran it to very, very poor results, but that was because of me as a player and not because of the team itself. It's a team that a lot of teams originally were prepping very hard for, and now as it's kind of faded a little bit from the format, you're not seeing it nearly as much. You're not seeing Pokemon on opposite teams that are maybe prepping as hard for a counter for it. However, even having the Gastrodon on Jingshui's side, I doubt you're going to see that in this game. There is no Gastrodon on the other side to worry about. It is the Incineroar and the Thundurus, though, versus the Charizard and the Grimmsnarl. So a nice bit of support with a nice amount of offensive pressure right next to it with some speed control opportunities.
Yeah, going straight into the opportunities that both players have speed control is really good, with both these teams being fairly offensive and relying on what speed tier they set themselves in. Jinghui, really scared of bringing out Incineroar, obviously because of the opposing Thundurus, and Nicolas kind of putting that pressure on straight away by bringing the Thundurus, being like, I have it here, so if you have your Incineroar in the back, it is going to be a bit of a nuisance trying to switch it in, but maybe just going for outright damage, maybe getting Sunset up when he can, or maybe just going for some, some pesky paralysis or tricks here and there can really slow down Nicolas's team, meaning Incineroar can come in safely and just keep going in and out where it needs to be to get intimidated on the right Pokemon, just trying to make sure that Thundurus isn't targeted down as much. As Charizard is going to go big here and does what it does best, and is probably going to go for that G-Max Wildfire, get chip damage down as soon as possible, and then maybe have a bit of help here from Grimmsnarl getting light screens up, or maybe a Reflect. Does go for a Protect though, so really playing it slow and safe, just guaranteeing that it's behind those screens for the next couple of turns. As we see, the Grimmsnarl goes for a Trick there, not going for the screens.
Yeah, Trick there, swapping an item. We'll have to find out exactly what that Thundurus got. If it moves slower on the next turn, because it will actually move slower on the next turn, we'll have to find out it is that Lagging Tail or that Iron Ball. Both attacks went into that Charizard here, interestingly enough. That Thundurus could have gone for something like that Wild Charge, just try and get a bunch of damage off as well. Haven't really been able to see exactly really too much from these turns, because they do feel almost more passive with this Protect, but it still at least gives this Charizard the option now to go for another strong move. However, it looks like instead there is going to be what looks like an Eerie Impulse from this Thundurus, so that Prankster variant instead dropping that special attack. It's going to take a G-Max Wildfire in retaliation still going to be enough to knock out here. And that, you know, that Iron Ball now showing that it does not matter whatsoever. That critical hit may have made a big difference. Incineroar, though, going for the parting shot on this turn is going to allow him to switch out and maybe make a little bit of a difference here moving forward. Actually, that Thundurus did not get knocked out, but it will get knocked out by the end of this turn thanks to that residual damage from the G-Max Wildfire. It just looked incredibly close.
Yeah, it's an incredibly close shaving of health there, and luckily Charizard doing its thing that makes Radiant so powerful, just getting rid of those Pokemon, you know, just whenever they live next to our HP. Focus Sashes, Shedinjas, that is just the be-all end-all. Maybe why Jinghui has gone to pick this team, because it just beats Shedinja so well if you can catch it off guard. But of course, you know, Nicolas probably has a way around these situations, you know, bringing in Groudon a bit annoying, where you can see the solar power is going to be activated straight away. Grimmsnarl is going for a foul play into that Groudon, doing loads of damage, so possibly a really good call on that switch in, and of course the effect of the wildfire will just chip away. Thundurus going down, so Incineroar, if it is in the back there, can safely come in and out in front of this Groudon, and if this is that Venusaurus in the back, or even the Calyrex Ice, you know, is that Incineroar, it's going to have a nice time looking at those with its super strong fire-type moves boosted by the sun.
Yeah, and also, you know, at this point, I think really interestingly as well, now we have that information on the Thundurus, and that Thundurus lead may have looked really stressful and forced that max guard to Jinghui at the beginning of turn 1, but now seeing that it's that Defiant, it's that Prankster variant that we kind of see running around a lot on things like the Reshiram teams that have been kind of floating around, you at least now don't have to worry about proccing something like a Defiant boost. You may feel more comfortable bringing your Incineroar in that next game. The Incineroar coming back out here, though, getting an Intimidate off, not too worried about it, but more importantly, the pressure of Fake Out or Parting Shot is always incredibly helpful, especially onto this Charizard that was already at -2 stages of special attack, and the Incineroar is not going to take any damage from that G-Max Wildfire residual thanks to its fire typing. So now, you know, if you are this Groudon, if you want to run something like Stone Edge, if you have the opportunity, maybe go for something like a Max Rock Ball. Grimmsnarl, though, switching out for the Zacian here. Zacian does have the opportunity to go for something like a Sacred Sword into the Incineroar on the opposite side. The Incineroar, having already come in, means that you're not going to be dealing with that Intimidate onto your Intrepid Sword boost. And Nicolas going to be able to go for his Dynamax of the game, nicely staggered behind Jingshui's, and it is going to be that Groudon. So Groudon coming out here does put on a lot of offensive pressure. You will be going slower than the Charizard, though, so you may not get as much pressure off as you wanted, especially with the sun up. However, Incineroar goes for the Fake Out into the Zacian slot. That did switch in, so no big worry there, while the G-Max Wildfire into the Groudon does not do really all that much damage thanks to those stat drops.
Yeah, the stat drops are looking amazing, just making sure that Charizard is doing nothing, and something that usually hits hard with. The Max Rockfall coming out in return, though, is going to get a nice little knockout and set up the sand as well, meaning that the Pokemon are going to be even more on a timer on both sides of the field. Not as an effective timer that is set by Jinghui with the G-Max Wildfire, but it's still a scary timer breaking Sashes nonetheless. Those 2-hit KOs become 1-hit KOs, there's 3 KOs and 2 KOs, and so on and so forth if the damage rolls are in Nicolas' favour. What we see here, Jinghui is going to offer to bring in Incineroar just to, you know, kind of dampen the effects of the sand a little bit more by reducing both the physical attackers' stats here, making it a bit more tolerable. You can probably get Zacian to knock out the Groudon. If not, you know, it's going to be a bit scary if the opposing Zacian can knock out yours. So it is going to be a few mind games and speed ties if you can get the play in right. If not, the Incineroar on the opposing side, you know, is also going to be threatening Flare Blitz if there's any damage going through there.
Yeah, and I think something that's kind of interesting to pay attention to, right, is we've seen the Groudon and the Incineroar, and, you know, if it is that Calyrex Ice Rider in the back, which there's a good chance it is, getting the Charizard off of the field is really helpful. However, you're still facing down the threat of the Incineroar on the opposite side, and if you lose your Groudon here and you're forced to bring it in, you may have to hope that you go for something like a Parting Shot with the Incineroar so that you can deal, actually, I've ended with a forfeit here. So it looks like Nicolas kind of realizing that his chances were a little bit tougher to kind of surmount, because you would have had to maybe go for something like a Parting Shot, switch your Pokemon around, allow for that Incineroar to go out, bring the Calyrex in, lose your Groudon to a Behemoth Blade, and then bring your Incineroar back in to have Fake Out pressure and allow for your Calyrex to get something like that Trick Room off. So you know, it's a really kind of tricky endgame. If you don't call your Groudon being knocked out, and then it kind of just sits on the field for another turn, then things can get a little bit dicey. If it went for a max flare, I mean, I think at this point, right, if you're Nicolas, you're probably trying to move forward a little bit in your game plan. Try and figure out something for a lead that may give you a little bit more offensive pressure, because leading that Thundurus, because it wasn't the Defiant form and it was the Prankster form, you were not able to get a ton of offensive pressure out. You were able to at least deal with that trick with the Iron Ball pretty well, which is nice. One thing that we get to know that Nicolas doesn't get to know is that 3 of the Pokemon that came to that match were all holding berries. There was a Lumberry, a Chople Berry, and one more berry. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there were 3 berries on that team. And if you bring in your Ice Rider, then you have the opportunity to shut down 3 of the items on the opposite side of the field. You know, type matchup doesn't always work out that way in circumstances anyway, but I think it was just something interesting to pay attention to.
Yeah, it's always good to pay attention to those little details in Pokemon, because it is, the minutia is what you can break or make a game with. And, the players getting that information where and as they can could really change the flow of the play. Of course, having those berries, a Lumberry means that the sleep powder option on the opposing side of the field isn't really an option for that one turn. And if you can play it right, you can get Charizard in, or whatever Pokemon has a Lumberry in at the right time just to get it done there. The berry on the Incineroar, meaning it's taking less and less damage from the Groudon, as we do see that the Porygon and the Incineroar coming in. So a lead we have seen throughout the history of VGC since Incineroar came through. 2 bros that go on forever and ever in front of 2 lovely looking fire types, which really hate to see that Groudon if it comes in the Charizard and the Incineroar. The attack drops not really mattering too much, as Incineroar can just get itself out there again. And the Charizard, it's just a special attacker. It can just go for those strong moves, and if we can see a nice pivot into either of the Groudons, that is going to be a very amazing thing to see for Jinghui on the Charizard side. So just they opt to go straight for that big damage into the Porygon 2, probably thinking they can get the partner shot off as soon as possible, or just go for a big switch and get that Sun up. And Porygon 2 hates taking these hits on Charizard when it gets that Sun boost.
Yeah, but I do like the option to maybe have something like a Trick Room and allow your Calyrex Ice to come in and start dealing some big damage, because it wasn't able to do so in that last game. But Charizard going for its Gigantamax, able to put out so much pressure now. It is not facing the option of an Eerie Impulse on the opposite side of the field from a Thundurus. At most, it could take a parting shot if you don't get it with a Fake Out first. The opposing Incineroar on Nicolas' side is faster than Xinghui's side, which is important because now that opposing Incineroar couldn't go for something like a Fake Out into the Porygon, who actually takes this G-Max Wildfire pretty comfortably here. And this does allow at least the Incineroar on the opposite side maybe not able to do any big changes here, but Porygon now able to get this Trick Room up for free. Will take a little bit of that residual damage, but could always switch out for something that may be able to handle it better, like that Groudon.
Yeah, it can always switch out for that Groudon, but then that is also buffing the Charizard on the opposing side, which is one of the things that Charizard has of its offensive presence. You can switch in things like an Assault Vest Groudon to maybe take a hit from it, but at the same time you're then indirectly buffing the Charizard, which can be very scary given the Pokemon on Nicolas' sides there. You've got the Ice types, Grass types, and just Pokemon that sometimes haven't got that bulk to try and take the accidental Sunset up in front of a Charizard. But then Jinghui also can opt to go to one of their slower Pokemon to try and counter his Trick Room, maybe thinking, okay, you've got these Trick Room Pokemon, I can go for a slow Pokemon like Gashadon or Incineroar, maybe even Grimmsnarl, because technically it's slow and you can get those screens up to do a little bit of damage there. But to see what happens as the Recover is coming out from the Paragons, making sure that it's sitting around, doing a lot more than it needs to be, getting that health back, meaning the wild damage won't do as much. The Parting Shot is coming out on the opposing Incineroar, just reducing any possible damage on there, and also just maybe thinking Porygon isn't the biggest offensive threat right now, and can just make sure that any like Darkest Lariats or maybe a Throat Chop or whatever is doing less and less damage. Groudon coming in, it's going to sit comfortably, and as I said, now that even though it's in the Trick Room, Charizard is very, very scary with that Sun set up alongside it.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about having the Incineroar move before the Charizard in Trick Room, is that you can get the Groudon in, and this Groudon takes this Flare Blitz in the Sun very well. The Incineroar not happy with that Parting Shot that it was dealing with earlier. Another G-Max Wildfire into this Porygon with the Sun Boost as well is just does so much damage, and it looks as well like that Porygon had copied that Solar Power ability, so it took that extra damage, which was enough to get the knockout thanks to the G-Max Wildfire. So you know, sometimes that traceability can do really well. You could trace something like a Drizzle, or you could trace something like a Drought, but when you trace something like Solar Power, you can accidentally put yourself on a timer for Jinghui to take advantage of.
Yeah, that is kind of a backfire where, you know, some players opt to maybe go for analytical or other abilities that really boost it if you go slower. But, you know, having the ability to just take your opponent's ability, you know, gives you the time to scout the field. But of course, with this matchup, you kind of know the abilities. It's such a common team, and these Pokemon do the same thing over and over again. Of course, if we see maybe Tri-Attack or even Thunderbolt on the Porygon, that could be beneficial with the effects of the weather going around. But that's something maybe the players have to, you know, establish in the upcoming games, because Porygon has really done its worth. It's got Trick Room up, it's recovered, it's tried to be stally, but Charizard and Groudon just are opting to be way too much of a problem for it. So it's just gonna be quite literally a sitting duck, possibly even Game 3 as well. And see what they do, and the players are opting to slowly get their moves in. As you see Groudon switching out on Jinghui's side, coming in for Incineroar, just getting Intimidates down. Both these Pokemon not liking Intimidates, and with that parting shot, the opposing Incineroar is doing less and less damage, you know, so any chip damage it was wanting to do is going to be dampened even further. Parting shot though, going into that Incineroar slot, which, you know, isn't as good of a slot to go in, given how we've seen that Incineroar, you know, didn't really mind the parting shot earlier because it only does less and less damage. But we'll get the opportunity to see what Nicolas can bring in, and that can be really beneficial to the field, as we do see Calyrex coming in. And with how low the defense stat is on Charizard, if Nicolas can time the moves correctly, we could see that knock out the Charizard and maybe just go ahead and do big damage. We do see that the Charizard does live the hit from the Groudon, going into Groudon with his own attack, and it does just make a knockout as well, giving a couple more turns to these Pokemon to go through and live, as the Wildfire and Solar Power do activate for the end of the turn.
Yeah, and Trick Room's running out here, right? That Solar Power is enough to get rid of the Groudon. That Stone Edge was not enough to pick up that knockout onto the Charizard. Looks like Nicolas was really hedging his bets to get his Dynamax Pokemon to be that Calyrex. Charizard's Dynamax turns are wrapping up here as well. Incineroar able to come in, put a little bit of pressure onto either of these Pokemon that can do that super effective damage to that Calyrex. But if it Dynamax is in holding something like that weakness policy, then that may be exactly what Nicolas wants to see. You know, if there is any sort of move from the Charizard that could do some damage. You know, Nicolas may have been trying to wait as long as possible, but he still doesn't have too much left to make use of that Trick Room. If he Dynamaxes now, he's not going to be able to utilize Trick Room for every single turn. That Zacian's going to be able to come in, go for something like a Behemoth Blade, and just get what is going to be a really easy knockout, because you can't really switch your Incineroar around anymore as well. If you're on Nicolas's side, you've already lost multiple Pokemon, so you know, it becomes, you're kind of stuck at this point if you're Nicolas, right? The Incineroar itself can at least get some fake out pressure this turn, can go for some Flare Blitz with at least the pressure from the sun. If the Groudon comes back in, it feels almost like every Pokemon on Jinghui's side can deal with this Calyrex, even if it goes into its Dynamax. You may just have to start going for a couple of funky double protects if you can. Incineroar switching out here makes a lot of sense to get another Intimidate onto this Calyrex later. Zacian switching back in instead does reveal the Zacian finally on the field, does not have to worry about getting further intimidated by an Incineroar on Nicolas's side, and the Protect from Charizard just trying to stall out the rest of this Trick Room, but there is no Dynamax here as well, so this Calyrex able to go for this Glacial Lance will only hit into that Zacian slot. The Zacian will take still a pretty decent chunk of damage from this as well, but it does make it a little bit more interesting because the Zacian actually handled that pretty comfortably here, and Solar Power now getting rid of Charizard, so you protected yourself from getting that Glacial Lance boost, which I think is huge, and going out on your own terms.
Yeah, going out on your own terms in a matchup like this is very good. You don't give the opponent the boosts from their abilities, but it also does have a detriment of your Pokemon behind. Incineroar coming in, though, does mean that detriment is dampened a little bit, because we all see the Intimidate and drop the attack stats on both Pokemon, which we've seen how little the Zacian took from the attack, but the White Herb will just reactivate those stat drops, meaning that the Calyrex can just go on and wreak havoc more and more. Of course, these Pokemon, their typings can take the hits quite well. Calyrex could maybe drop to Zacian if Zacian is EV in the way to knock it out, so, and vice versa if the Calyrex has EV to take the hit. But with two Pokemon that's super afraid of it, it could be forced to protect, and if Jinghui goes around that, we could see a double up into the Incineroar, maybe just try and get rid of that, because that is also scary for this Zacian. It's just loads of 50-50s here because of high horsepower, because of flare blitz, because of maybe parting shot. Just each player has their own way to just get around the situation. Could be scary, and we see that players are getting a bit scared as the command time is dropping to the mere seconds there when they just get to lock in as Incineroar to switch out here. Groudon coming in. Groudon really doesn't like taking hits from Calyrex, especially when that White Herb has replaced its stats. Protect here from Zacian, just trying to play a bit safe, maybe thinking, okay, you can take down Groudon, you need to get another Incin in. High horsepower though, going into that Groudon also, so good call there from Jinghui, calling that an attack would go into the Incineroar only, and a Protect just stops anything coming out from the opposing Incineroar, which, gives the pace a bit of a, bit better. And Jinghui can kind of think a couple more turns ahead.
Honestly, if you're Jinghui, I think you're really excited to see that it's White Herb on that Calyrex instead of something like that Weakness Policy. And now that you've been able to time out that Trick Room, pretty much you have the opportunity to just start getting some big hits onto this Calyrex. It may need to be forced to Dynamax this turn just to handle that damage, but because it's not going to get any of those boosts to its attack, you can bring your Incineroar back in. This thing is not going to be able to raise its stats unless it's able to get a knockout, right? So Incineroar, not going to have to worry too much at this point. It's got a great amount of HP. If it takes a high horsepower, if either of these Pokemon take a high horsepower, they're not going to be too happy about it, but at least having the Dynamax on the field is going to at least give you an opportunity to maybe deal with this damage a little bit better. The Incineroar on your side of the field is still possibly able to make the most. Oh, interestingly, it's the Incineroar going for the Dynamax here, which does make a lot of sense. You have the opportunity for max flares. You'd be able to deal with something like a Stone Edge, maybe from the Groudon. You can possibly put enough pressure out onto the Zacian here and protect with your Calyrex. Get the big threat off of the field. Zacian's Behemoth Blade into that Calyrex does not do any damage thanks to that protect. And Incineroar's max flare into this Zacian is doing a ton of damage, even with the Intimidate, and it's not enough to get the knockout thanks to those Intimidates that were being cycled around by the opposing Incineroar.
Yeah, Incineroar going big is something that maybe Jinghui didn't really predict. Of course, it is an option that can go big. It's not one of those Pokemon that is completely supportive that you see in these formats. I mean, even so, sometimes you see them go big just for the secondary effects of attacks, maybe setting up Sun or setting up maybe the stat drops. We do see that it does give Zacian a bit more free reign to go for the big damage. The Calyrex is likely going to drop to this, and it does mean that the Nicolas is another Pokemon down, but Incineroar is threatening so much damage with this Dynamax factor set up, and it's taking so little damage from the attacks that are benefiting from a Dynamax factor. Max Flare going into the Zacian though, just guaranteeing it's knocked out, maybe just going for a Protect. And then all it is an Incineroar facing down Zacian. I believe Groudon is still in the back with Jinghui. If not, then that is going to be a very sticky situation, because this Incineroar is a lot weaker. You can go for the parting shots, but in the end of the day, is that going to be enough to stop the pace that has been set by going for a Dynamax? As you see, Groudon does come in, but Groudon in the sun might not like to take these hits from the Incineroar, especially at the size it has right now. And maybe it's EV to maybe not take the hits, from the Precipice Blades, and just go with the flow and live and live and live, even with these stat drops.
Yeah, that Calyrex not getting that double protect was huge thanks to that Zacian living on such a low amount of HP, because it was able to just knock it off of the field. Nicolas was probably hedging his bets that even with the stat drops on his Incineroar, he would be able to get that knockout onto the Zacian with a max flare, but having that not happen means that it's now Incineroar versus both of these Pokemon that can still do a nice amount of damage. If you're Jinghui, you can continue to throw out parting shots into the Incineroar on the opposite side of the field. You can go for maybe what looks like either a rock tomb there, actually dropping the speed of the Incineroar, revealing the rock type move on this Groudon, and then going for a Throat Chop or a Darkest Lariat there, just to do a little bit more damage. Your max flare does very little into the Groudon, and you're wrapping up your Dynamax turns here. So I think if you're Jinghui, you may just have to start worrying about going for Precipice Blades and hoping that they'll connect. This Incineroar is not going to do enough damage to you with its own recoil to give you really any problems, and the opposing Incineroar as well can continue to go for parting shots if it really wants to start trying to get those stat drops as well. Groudon, though, with Precipice Blades, looks like it is going into the Shuka Berry for this Incineroar on the opposite side, and hopefully should be able to pick up that knockout here. It is not able to, but hopefully that partner Pokemon of Incineroar can. However, it looks like Incineroar going for that Flare Blitz should be able to get enough damage to wrap up the game for Jinghui's side. So I think the fact that Calyrex was not, or that the Calyrex was knocked out at that end game really is what kind of sealed the fate there. And you can argue with the Incineroar that maybe if it wasn't intimidated or parting shotted, it may have been in a better position to wrap up the end of the game. But losing that Calyrex and losing the opportunity for double targeting moves or super effective moves into the opposite side of the field with something like that high horsepower, losing that kind of really did seal the deal. But it was smart to not go for that Dynamax because that Behemoth Blade would have knocked it out in that Dynamax form. So at least getting some Dynamax turns that you can make use of definitely has that merit to it.
Yeah, going for Dynamax moves on such an unorthodox Pokemon does give you that surprise factor as well, and the merit of just going for as much damage as possible. Maybe thinking that it is a sticky situation, but I can get myself out of it by doing the damage, and that is a kudos to Nicolas for going for that. But it just didn't go the right way in those end games because Zacian lived and it got the knockout. Maybe some EVs were placed there to make sure that happened, but that can also be a bit of a weird calculation that players don't often go for winning these games. But it was nice to see something go big. The cats going big is always a fun idea to see because often it is just going for fake out and U-turn and parting shot, and doing something different is always a fun sight.
Yeah, and that will actually wrap up this week for China and France. A great way for China to kind of wrap up on a win, bring a really close week to both of these teams. It ended up being 5-3 for France's favor. Does at least give France, I think, a couple of things to think about moving forward. That Calyrex Ice Rider and Groudon team, we've seen it pop up a little bit more in the past few weeks, and it's something that I feel like you have to get yourself into Trick Room and utilize your Trick Room as best you can. And having, the Prankster Thundurus, it is a great Pokemon, and it is a great way to kind of bait and switch your opponent. If you go for something, if you lead it, and then they're assuming that you're in a Dynamax that turn one, they may have you target into it, and you can start just maybe going for something like an Eerie Impulse, or you could go for an Electro Web if you are moving a little bit quicker. A couple of different options that you have there, instead of maybe trying to and maybe make them leave something like their Incineroar at home instead of bringing the Incineroar out onto the field, which may be a great way for you to set up some Pokemon on the back of your own party. But I think it just becomes an interesting mind game there of trying to utilize the positioning of your Groudon versus the position of their Groudon. Because if your Groudon brings, and like you said, boosts up that Charizard at the beginning of the game, it's not going to be great for you. But if they want to send in their Charizard and send in their Groudon and boost up their own Charizard, then you have to be able to kind of apply pressure into the slot that the Groudon may want to switch into. And whether that ends up being something like just targeting into that slot with something like a parting shot and just even if you have kind of a bit of a free switch in or a free target onto there, knowing that there's going to be a switch, that may be something that you need to take more advantage of just kind of moving forward, because that Groudon was able to sit on the field, I think, way too comfortably for way too long. There wasn't enough threatening it, and that Charizard sat all three of its Dynamax turns relatively unscathed. So it was taking its own damage from the solar power, but that solar power itself was paying way more dividends than the damage that you were putting onto the Charizard during its Dynamax.
Yeah, and getting damage down everywhere is just paying dividends to, whatever could the result of an end game could be. And that is unfortunately, that mirrors what the result of this game as well could have been, China taking the win. But at the end of the day, they didn't take the win for the whole team, but it was two really strong countries fighting it out, like these strong Pokemon fighting it out, and we'll get to see more and more of these strong Pokemon as we come out through the rest of the stream and just go on through the rest of our games, which are full of action and packed to the brim. And it's just great to be able to cast those games. So we should probably be seeing those coming on in quite a moment now. We'll just have a bit of a rest, go through the games and have a quick update on what teams we could see, and it'll be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys want to stick around for that next match, this one is going to be, I think, one of our most exciting of the day. It is between Mexico and South Korea. This match has a lot of stakes in it, so do not go anywhere. We will be back from a very short break very soon.